Hello and welcome to the Celtic Down Under podcast. I'm your host, Jarrod, and joining me tonight is Steven. How are you, Steven?
Yeah, I'm good, Jarrod. Not too bad. Just baking away nicely up here in Sydney. It's bloody hot.
Yeah, saw that. We've had thunderstorms and all sorts down here, so it's been a bit of a complete opposite down here in Melbourne's. But anyway, we won't bore everyone tuning in about the weather. Tonight's podcast, over the international break, we're going to be doing some Tim Talk podcasts. So what are our Tim Talk podcasts? Well, it started off with me just interviewing people from different CSCs and different Celtic supporters from different social media pages, and I built it up to the point where it tends to be in international breaks and over the off season we do a lot of these, just getting to know people who watch the show, people who are Celtic minded, and have that bit of a background in the club. So what we've done the last few is more as of a get to know you to the Celtic Down Under podcasters. So tonight's Tim Talk is Stephen's one. So we're going to go through that, get to know a bit more about Steven, how he became a Celtic fan, and just probably go off on some tangents. So, as I just said there, Steven, how did you become a Celtic fan?
Well, probably unlike a lot of people who support Celtic, it didn't come from my father. My father was a Kilmarnock fan. I was born and brought up in Ayrshire. My dad was from Kilmarnock, born and bred in the town. So he was a fan of the club, and actually was on the books with Kilmarnock when he was younger. He didn't make it as a professional, but he was very passionate about Kilmarnock. But my mum's side of the family were a huge, big Irish family from West Cork, and Celtic was something that was always just around the house, without anybody really having to put it there, if you know what I mean. It was always at the centre of everything we spoke about, even though my dad wasn't a Celtic fan. And when I was really young, really a toddler, I can remember him taking me along to a few Kilmarnock games, probably early 70s to mid 70s sort of time. But I was always only interested in Celtic, and I started going along to Celtic games with my dad, probably towards the late 70s. The very first game, the game that sort of triggered me as a Celtic fan, was the 1980 European Cup quarter-final against Real Madrid, where we beat them 2-0 at home at Celtic Park. And after that, I was just hooked, and probably started going regularly home and away on my own round about 1984 sort of time. And ever since that, I've been just a regular. It's been a part of my life all the way up till I immigrated to Australia in 2007. And it's been a long distance relationship since then.
Yeah, it's always fun following the club from over here. Like I've said on numerous Tim Talks and stuff, like me having been born and raised here with the family tie in, following Celtic from over here, it's so much easier now than it used to be. But listen to what you were just saying. You're one of those Celtic fans that actually knows what Killy's home stadium looks like without plastic on it, without a plastic pitch. There you go.
I know it very, very differently. When I was going to Kilmarnock against my dad, it was an oval stadium, and it was just all terracing in one stand, very much like the bulk of Scottish grounds. And they had a really big support at that time. And I know a lot of Celtic fans really dislike Kilmarnock and regard them as just like Rangers fans without the bus fare. But that I understand why people think that, but that wasn't really my experience. My experience was, they were just a team that they just were very proud of their own town. The town's all gone to shit now. The industries have all left it, and I think that's probably a lot to do with the fact that of why the football club's so poorly supported now, because nobody's getting any money. But back at that time, they were getting full houses and selling out the ground. They actually won the league, Kilmarnock, in 1965, just before the Lisbon Lions domination started. So by the time the early 70s came along, they were still a little bit of successful whiff about them, and they were always one of the bigger teams in Scotland. So. It's got to hell in a handcart now, and there's hardly anyone goes to see them. I think everybody just goes up the road to Glasgow now.
Yeah, just from my history and what I heard about it all and everything, it was like they were decent in the 60s, as you said, before the Lions happened, and then off the back of the Lisbon Lions, there was little bit of chop and change, and then you had like that they called the new firm, Aberdeen and Dundee United, came in with Fergie up in Aberdeen and that sort of stuff. And can't remember the other guy who was at
Jim
Dundee.
McLean.
I knew it was Jim something. I couldn't remember his last name, but
Mm.
they come in, and then it's just been Celtic Rangers non-stop pretty much for 30 plus years or something like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's just strange. Like, I like listening to these. That's what I like about these. I learn stuff myself, like hearing about Killy being decent back then. I've heard it, but I never actually twigged on it. So hearing you saying that is actually, yeah, it's just triggered a memory and something I've been told by people that I've met in the past as well. So it's great to hear. So I'm gonna ask you a bit of a question here, because originally when I did these the Tim talks, we were talking about Ange and as the manager, and then as we'd recently, the last batch we'd recently changed. Ange had gone to Tottenham, Brendan Rodgers had come in. So it's been a few months now. So since the change, I just want to know, how do you look back on Ange's time at the club? Like, considering you're based over here in Australia, how do you look back on it?
Yeah, look, I think you can't overstate how well Ange did at Celtic. When you consider the absolute shambles he walked into, with barely 11 first-team players available to him, and to take that to, what was it, 5 trophies out of possible 6 in 2 seasons. It was just an incredible achievement, and he gave us some of the sort of more exciting brand of football that we've seen in the past 3 decades anyway. It was just wonderful to watch. Gave us some great memories, and signed some great players anyway in his first season anyway. So I think being down here, as you mentioned, it was great, because we were on the news all the time. When we had a big win over Rangers, there was a highlight section on the Channel 9 News on the Sunday. So and people were talking about Celtic. The strips, the jerseys started appearing in the shops more regularly. You were getting onto the Australian press. People were talking about the club, and it was just marvellous. And so for that reason, I'm disappointed he's not there anymore. But it's just a factor of being successful at Celtic, and when you are, whether you're a player or whether you're a manager, you're always going to be coveted by the teams down in England. I'm surprised that they went to Tottenham for 2 reasons. One, I didn't think he would go to a club like Tottenham. I thought he would hold out for one of the bigger clubs than that. I know Tottenham are a big club, but I thought he would be holding out for a Liverpool or something. And the second reason I was surprised, because I didn't think a club like Tottenham would take him straight from Celtic. I thought he would have to, they would be looking for him to go and do a couple of years at a team like, I don't know, Brighton or something, or one of the lower EPL teams. So I was surprised when he moved to Tottenham. But I was a bit annoyed at the time and a bit upset at the time. But time's a healer, and you can only look back with fondness on his time at the club, and hopefully, some people down here in Australia will keep a little bit of their heart for Celtic, and keep an eye on our results moving forward.
Yeah, just for me, it was like, as you said, it's great seeing more news coverage. It was in the papers. This is a great time to be an Australian-based Celtic fan. We had the Sydney Super Cup. He brought the boys down here. It was the first time down here in 11 years or something like that, I think it was. So it was just a whole bunch of positives overall. The football, yeah, it speaks for itself. It just shows the sort of class manager that Ange is as well, in terms of, as you said, I thought as well, all the talk was, if you want to go to the EPL, he'd probably have to go to an Everton or a West Ham or something like that, was the sort of bridging club that I thought he'd go to. And then he'd get his move to a top 4, top 6 team, but he's gone straight into basically a top 6 team that had a down season last year in Tottenham and currently sitting top of the EPL. So it just shows the level of class that
For
he
me,
had there.
what sets Ange aside from other managers? It's not really his knowledge of football, because he's not doing anything revolutionary here. There's plenty of people playing that kind of Ange ball sort of system with inverted fullbacks and all this sort of thing. What sets him apart is his character. He's just like a really special guy who knows how to say the right thing at the right time. I mean, he had the Scottish media pack on toast up here, and watching him down in England, he seems to have the sort of EPL media pack on toast as well. You've seen his seen a sort of Q&A thing he did a few weeks ago with some Tottenham people, and there was a little special needs kid down in the front row, and he was trying to ask a question, and the presenter tried to wind the show up without him asking his question, but Ange said, no, stop, we're not finishing until this kid gets to ask his question, and the boy did. He got a chance to ask his question and then got a reply from it, and the look in this little kid's face would have brought tears to a glass eye, to be honest. So that's the type of guy he is, and I don't think there's many more like him in the world of football. He's just a special guy.
Yeah, and that's the sort of thing that memory is going to live long in that kid's memory, and then it will also in his mind and his life. And he grows up, he's a Tottenham fan. His kids will be Tottenham fans. Everyone he knows will be about it, and that's just something that makes you love your club and stuff like that. And it's little things like that. It doesn't hurt Ange to spend that extra 2 minutes on stage doing that, or it doesn't hurt him to stop for a photo when he's out and about. As long as it's not when he's out with his wife and kids, but to stop for a quick photo or whatever. He's that sort of guy. He seems like your big affable uncle who you have a laugh with. You can sit around like an Aussie's all things. You can sit around a fire pit in summer having a couple of brews with and just like enjoying life, having a laugh. But at the same time, I wouldn't want to say the wrong thing and have him growl at me.
No, I don't think he would take any nonsense, put it that way.
Yep. So off the back of Ange leaving with Brendan Rodgers coming in, though, are you finding the transition from Ange ball to the way Brendan has the team playing?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of a difficult transition, not made any easier by the fact we lost a couple of really good players in Jota and Aaron Moy over the summer, and we've also had been really unfortunate with injuries to some really key players at the start of the season. But I think Brendan Rodgers, his qualities as a manager are quite clear. He's certainly up there with the best of them, and what we're seeing now is that sort of starting to come to fruition. I think tactically and in game, I think he's really good, and he really knows how to make changes in game to influence the outcome. He's a very good man manager. I think that's evidenced by the sort of comments that Matt O'Reilly has been making, and certainly Matt O'Reilly just looks like a completely different player this year. So he's obviously relishing playing under Brendan Rodgers. And I've got no doubt that Brendan Rodgers will get us the success that we need. There's some question marks about how he was backed in the transfer window, but if he's backed properly, yeah, then I can see good times ahead for Celtic. We're starting to see, the team are starting to understand what's required of them. Certain players are picking up form again, and we saw a lot of evidence of that in the game against Kilmarnock at the weekend when everything just seems to be starting to click. And I think by the time we get to Christmas, we'll be a well-oiled machine. So it's been a bit of a difficult transition, which is probably to be expected, but it's getting there now.
It's also you got to look at it and go, well, Brendan was openly saying that he wasn't planning on managing at the start, ready to go at the start of the season. He was going to have a bit of a break. So the fact is that he's had a bit of time off. Probably wasn't out there going, okay, I've got my shopping list. I know I'm going to be at this club. These are the players I want. So he didn't have his ear to the ground per se in terms of being in the market. So he could hit the ground running, walk in, and like when Ange come in, he's like, I want Kyogo straight away. You didn't see Brendan come in with that. And then on top of it, you also had the change of playing style, but then Brendan also had to learn how our guys play, what are their strengths, what areas of the pitch they work best in, all while going through turnover, as you said, and an injury crisis. So it hasn't been an easy transition there, but I think as we said on Monday's pot noodle that that was probably our first full 90-minute performance against Killy at the weekend. So yeah, it's good to see. So the next thing I want to talk on, because we're just talking about some recruitment and that. So before we dive into actual recruitment, I want to get your take, Stephen, on the club structure at present. Are you happy with the current setup? Like, you have a really dominant manager, comes in, doesn't bring his own staff. He keeps guys on who were there beforehand, like Ange did, like Brendan's done. Or do you think if we're going to keep our current staff, we also need to have a director of football, so that, because as we're saying, like Ange was 2 years, every manager, every player has a shelf life. There's going to be the churn and burn of players and managers leaving, so we need that someone overseeing what's going on. What's your thoughts? Keep it going how it is. Director of football set up eventually. Floor's yours.
Yeah, I'm not unhappy with the way things are set up just now. I think when a lot of people think about a director of football, you get this image of a sort of older, more experienced guy who's basically sitting up across the manager, and sort of he's in control of the whole football operation. And he's sort of appointing managers, and he's making decisions based around recruitment and all that. But I don't really think that's the type of director of football that I would like to see us having. And what we've got just now is a situation where you really do have a director of football in Mark Law, who's really across a lot of the aspects that a director of football would be. And rather than that director of football being above the manager, the director of football for me should actually work for the manager, and the manager should get a say in who the director of football is. So I'm quite happy with the keeping the backroom staff, keeping the academy guys stable, and I'm quite happy to keep Matt Law around the place if he's successful and if he can show that he's good enough at the job. But I don't really see the need for bringing a sort of Martin O'Neill type figure or someone like that, or guys that have been mentioned, or some guy like Ralph Ragnick, or some other bespectacled German or something, who's going to sit above the manager and sort of run the whole operation. I don't think that's the right way forward. So whether Mark Law's the right guy or not, I'm not 100% sure. We need to wait and see on that. I'm not really in a position to make a judgment on that at the moment. I think I'd probably prefer it if it wasn't the current chairman's son. I think I'd probably reckon there was a little bit less nepotism behind his appointment. But I think that the current structure is probably okay.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. The current structure works for a club of our size with the finances we have and everything that's going on. You touched on it with Mark Lawwell in that role. That's what I think as well. But the ideal system for me is if you have a look at what Ajax has, where they have their first team manager, their head of recruitment, and their director of football basically as like a three-man sort of group. And then also Dortmund does the same thing with Michael Zorc as the director of football. And then they have a couple of other guys as well, the manager and like a recruitment guy, all at the same sort of level. I like that system because, as you're saying, the manager has to work with the director of football. The director of football has to work for the manager, make the academy run, feed those players through, while also having the recruitment guys reporting into him and the manager so they can go, this is the sort of player I want. Like Brendan comes in and goes, I want a 6'4" defensive midfielder and a 6'6" centre back. And I want the centre back to be left footed. Go find it, recruitment guy. Do that. And at the same time, the director of football can be doing the phones, working on other options like it works there. I think that sort of setup would work best for us. I don't really want, as you said, a Martin O'Neill type coming in or a Gordon Strachan coming in over the top. I think the way football's gone, I don't like using the term dinosaurs, but the game's moved on from a lot of the guys that were being linked in that. In terms of Martin O'Neill, great guy, did a lot for the club, but I just don't think it's him in that role. The perfect candidate I thought for us as a director of football, I used to say that was I just had a mental blank. Not Lambert, what was the other bloke? He used to
John
appear on
Collins,
67.
maybe?
No, he used to appear on 67 Hail Hail, and he used to be the manager at Dundee United. Jackie McNamara, that's the one.
All right.
He's the one I would have
Right.
loved because he's done his agent stuff. He's been a manager. He used to play for the club. He's the sort of guy that I think would be ideal in a director of football sort of role if you don't want that nepotism going on with Mark Law in the role.
Yeah. Look, I mean, Mark Law might well be the best recruitment guy, or the best sort of, head of recruitment guy that we could get. I don't know that. And it just happened. It's just a complete accident that he's Peter Law's son. And it's pretty meaningless. But, somehow I find that a little bit hard to believe. And the problem we have in a director of football is it's very good and well if likes of Ange moves on, and from a successful team, and you bring another manager into a successful team. But the problem is if things don't go well and the manager gets sacked, the director of football then comes under fire for being part of the team that appoints the manager. So, do you know what I mean? So at some point then the director of football will be under pressure to get sacked, especially if you have two bad managers in a row. Pretty similar to what's happened over at Rangers. Now, they've been a shambles over the past couple of years, and I can't remember their director of football's name for the life of me, but he got bagged late on last year, and now they're sort of back to square one.
Yeah, they got John Park basically doing it now because the other bloke's gone. But so talking about the director of football thing, and this ties into the next question. So I want to ask you how you think our recruitment has been over the last 12, 18 months. So if we go back to July 2022, for instance, so that's around about the 15-month mark when Mark Lawwell arrived in as our head of first team scouting and recruitment. So basically a director of football. These are all the players that he's brought in. Jens, Haksabanovic, Abelgard, Kobayashi, Alistair Johnson, Awada, O, Home, Tilio, Yang, Kwon, Lagerbelka, Palmer, Naroski, Phillips, Bernardo. That's the recruitment that's come in since he's been in the door in that. How do you feel the recruitment has been over the last 12, 18 months?
Well, I mean, it's not really been good enough, has it? If you look at the teams, the starting lineup in the last couple of games, particularly in the Champions League, there's really the only player that's been signed in that time period who's a nailed-on starter is Alistair Johnson. So that's one player out of that whole list of guys that you round off there, and it's not really good enough. If you look at the guys who are really doing well for us just now, like Kyogo, like Maeda, like Hatate, like Cameron Carter-Vickers, and like Jota, who left in the summer, these guys were all on board in Ange's first season. I know they got made permanent in the next year's transfer window, but that wasn't anything to do with Mark Lawwell. But the sort of mainstays of our team were all brought in that first one or two transfer windows under Ange. And ever since Mark Lawwell's appeared in the building, it's just been a collection of like cheaper transfers. And we've ended up now with basically a very bloated squad. And that's what happens when you play a numbers game. You sign a high number of players at low value. You might find a gem in there. And you certainly, Palmer probably looks as if he's a very good player. We got Matt O'Reilly for pretty cheap. So there's a couple that have came good. But for every one of them, there's a Kwon who, nobody at this point, nobody can see him making the grade. You've got guys like Abelgard who come in and then left. You've guys like Jens who come in and left. I know some of these guys were only on loan. But we wasted a lot of money on wages on them. So I don't think it's really been good enough. And I think, people who were looking for, rather than a numbers game and maybe signing 9 players, I think we signed over the close season there, we should have been looking to sign maybe 4 or 5 players, but at higher value players who are more likely to hit the ground running. Now, nothing's ever guaranteed. You can go and spend £10 million on a player and he does his ACL in his first training session. That's just the risk of football, but you have to try. And I just don't think we've got that balance right at the moment.
100% agree with you. Like, that's what we said as well. Look, I would have loved it, say, if we had like 20, what we get for Jota, 25 million, 17 or 19 million of that came into our pockets. The rest went to Benfica. So realistically, if you've got that plus the money that was already there, if you went out and spent in that Carter Vickers Jota range, the 6 to 8 million range, and got 3 players at that, and then you still brought in like Attilio, you brought in, if you wanted him, if you wanted to bring in, Yang for his 2.5 million, if you wanted to bring in a couple of other guys in those smaller ones, makes sense. Because for me, you get the guys, bring them in to be actual starters, but then those smaller ones, they're the guys that you want to be behind the starters, developing, nipping at their heels. So eventually you get to that production line that we've spoken about on the pod. So say you get to a point where Palmer's doing well. Say he does amazing in the Champions League, gets himself a move in 2 years' time. You want it to be at the point where if Palmer's ready to move on and you're going to make 20, 30 million for him, and you've had Tilio nipping at his heels for a year and a half, challenging him, raising his standard, eventually he should be ready to step into that role and take it when Palmer moves. Then you just buy your replacement behind Tilio again and you go again. That's the ideal world for our model with our budget. But yeah, at the moment it's been hit and miss. Like all these little 1.5 million players here and that. Like of that
Yeah, good.
15 players I rattled off there for Mark Law, and as you said, only one of them starts week in, week out. And Johnson, it's not like he was an unknown quantity because he was replacing another guy who was a starting right back that got to the Final Four in the World Cup in Juranovic. So it's not like
He's
the squad
also
got remarkably better.
Johnson's also turning 25 this week, so he's not a young kid. So he wasn't, another one that wasn't part of that model where we sign players, 20 to 22 for low money, try and develop them and move them on. But the problem we have is, and the problem with that model is, you've got guys there like Kobayashi, for instance, who, I'm sure he's not a bad player. He's just not really hit the ground running at Celtic. But what do you do with him now? He needs games. He needs to play for someone. And he's not going to get it at Celtic. He's not going to play. He's not going to get a game unless there's a really, unless there's another centre back crisis. But we seem to be on the mend in that area. So we don't have a reserve team. We don't have anywhere for these guys to play regular minutes. So if they're not out on loan, I'm struggling to see how they're going to develop. And that goes for the likes of Kwon as well. If he's not going to get first team minutes, which he's not, then he's not going to get any minutes at all. And I'm just not sure how these guys are going to develop into better players under those circumstances. It's okay having a winger on the bench. Like guys like Tilio and Yang will get plenty of game time this year because the wing positions, we can always rotate the wing positions in and out. But centre halves and central midfielders, it's very much more difficult to rotate those positions. And, these guys are just going to be struggling for game time. And if you don't get them game time, they're not going to get better and you're not going to increase their value either. So for that, if you continue to play this numbers game and just stockpile these types of players, you're just going to be left with them having to pay to get them off the wage bill in a couple of years' time.
It's not like we're like a Chelsea or a Man City or whatever who, are part of some sort of group. Like Chelsea, like have their partnership with some over in Holland, or you've got the City group, so you've got a bunch of teams you can loan guys out to. Like the best loan returns I think we've had recently have been Aya when he went for that half season down a Killy, Ryan Christie when he's gone up for the year and a half to Aberdeen, he's come back looking like a machine. I look at it and go, Scales has gone on loan. He's doing well for us. He was a couple of days off being sold to Aberdeen. And then we had our injury crisis and he's established himself. So, Aberdeen were looking for a centre back. I'd almost say to him, take Kobayashi on an 18-month loan. What's the worst that can happen? Get him up there, get him playing regular football in Scotland at the stadiums he's going to be playing at for us in our league. And if it doesn't work for him by the end of that, well, then, all bets are off basically.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, certainly these guys, we need to be looking at some sort of loan deals for them.
So speaking about, we're just talking about loan deals and that, which current players at the club do you think will be moving on in the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, it's a
I've got a
difficult one.
list of
I
about
think
8 to 10 players basically because the squad's
yeah,
so bloated. So let's see what you
you
think.
got you got you got a bunch of guys there that aren't playing who will be straight out the door. You guys like James McCarthy. I think Ideguchi's still on the books, isn't he? I think he'll be heading for the exit door. I think guys like Kobayashi will need to go on loan, or if they don't want to go on loan, it will need to be a permanent transfer out the door. Mikey Johnson, he seems to be getting added to the European bench, but he's not making the bench in domestic games. So, he's obviously not fancied either. So he'll probably be going. And then you've got guys like James McCarthy, who, I mean, God only knows why he's still there. I can only assume he's quite happy to just take his money and do whatever he's doing, because he doesn't seem to be even pictured in any training videos or anything like that. So yeah, you would think he'd be heading for the door.
He's the
Siegrist,
cameraman, Steve. He's the cameraman, Stephen, you know.
yeah,
He's the
got to
guy
be.
behind the camera doing it. That's the way he's got to earn his wage.
Yeah, he must be the social convener or something. He's organising the nights out. Yeah, and Benji Siegrist will obviously be going as well because he's a mile away from getting an opportunity. I think he'd rather play an outfield player in goals than play Siegrist at the moment. So I think he's definitely headed probably down the our neck of the woods if rumours are to be believed.
Yep. That's the talk, yeah. Segrist asked to move down here because he wants to be close to his missus. So yeah, he'll probably end up down here, which then means we need to get a goalkeeper, which ties into our next one. What areas of the team do you think we need to strengthen? And goalkeeper would be one. But what else do you think?
Yeah, I think goalkeeper definitely one. I think, like most people, I think I'm a bit concerned about the left back situation. Although Taylor's form has improved the last few weeks, I still think he's short of what's required in Europe, the Champions League. And we also don't have a backup left back at all, unless you count Scales as your backup left back. And I'm not convinced that's where we want to be either. Bernabei's been an unmitigated disaster of a signing. He just can't, he can't get a run of form together. He looks very poor. His concentration looks very poor. His passing's all over the place, and he can't seem to keep himself out of trouble off the pitch either, which is also disappointing. So I can't see Bernabei being there for much longer either. So, from that point of view, if Greg Taylor was to get injured, I think he's away on international duty this week with Scotland. If he was to come back with a knock, then I think we'd be in a bit of trouble. I think we'd probably have to play Scales there because Bernabei just looks a mile short of where we need to be. Outside a left back, I wanted them to sign a number 10 as well. Now, I'll qualify that by saying Paulo Bernardo might be that player, but I still don't think we're well covered in that area. I think Hatate, his form has improved. He played really well against Kilmarnock, but he's had in general terms a very poor start of the season. So we need to see more from him. And add to the fact that he would seem to be one of the more likely players to be moving on for a big money transfer, maybe next summer or the year after, albeit he signed a new contract, which will increase his value. So I think we still need to sign a number 10. And I think we need to sign another striker because I don't fancy O as a backup to Kyogo. Again, if Kyogo come back from international break with an injury, I think we'd be in trouble. I don't think O's the guy to be slotted in there to replace him. And I don't think in a domestic context Maeda is either. So I think that should have all been covered in the transfer window in the summer. But I think that's something we're really going to have to address in January. I think aside from that, the wide players, nearly wait and see how Palma does, how Tilio comes into the team and how he settles in to see how well we're fixed in that area. We've not really replaced what Jota brought to the team, but I hope Tilio is that guy, a guy that, the option, you can go inside or outside. He's got a little bit of pace to burn the fullback, and his delivery into the box is good and consistent, and he's also good to get on the score sheet. So I hope that Tilio can fill that hole, but that remains to be seen. And if he doesn't, then I still think we need another wide player.
I think we need another wide player anyway, but it's just going to depend on where they come from because I look at it and go, a lot of our wide players are multi-positional. Like Tilio can play left, right, and he can play in the 10. Palmer can play left and in the 10. You've got Maeda plays anywhere across the front three. Like he can play as a striker. He plays right and left at the moment. You got Forrest who's playing right and left. So you've got lots of options there. You've got a Barter who plays on the right, but can also, in a pinch, in domestic at least, play as a striker. So you've got plenty of options there. So it's like, okay, who's gonna fill what role? Are we not signing that number 10 that you're wanting because we've got Tilio and Palmer who can jump in and play in there if need be? Are we not signing the striker because Maeda's the backup striker and then O's the third string striker? Because if you do that, you bring Maeda in, you put other wingers in, and you've got coverage. Could that be how we're playing it? Doing stuff like that. That's what it looks like at the moment. But I kind of rather the certain player positions that you need a specialist player in. Striker, I like a specialist striker. Gotta say, I think we're missing Giakoumakis this season. Honestly, there's been some games
100%.
teams are playing and parking on it, and O just looks like he just wants to run out and just, battle everyone and play rugby rather than actually, get himself into scoring positions the way Giakoumakis used to get between the line and position himself and header it and one-touch finishing. Like, we might have that player. I don't know if that's him, but I think we're missing that. So I'd rather a specialist striker. But, we could do a lot worse than go up the road to Aberdeen and look at Duck or for someone like that or Miofsky up there because I've got a couple of decent strikers at Aberdeen who are better than what our third option is in O. So I don't know. There's always options. And then someone in the comments later on will, when this goes out, will mention Lauren Shanklin. Someone always does.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's kind of annoys me a bit, though, is we are a bit snobbish about the Scottish game. And over the past few years, we've turned our nose up at some players who've gone on to be pretty good. I mean, you look at the likes of Aaron Hickey, who's now an EPL player, probably out of our price range. Now, we had him on our books as a youth player, but we also had a chance to sign him when he was at Hearts before he went to Italy, to Bologna. And it would have cost us probably about 3 or 4 million, which is probably a bit rich for a Scottish Premier League player. But he was and is a good player, and he's now a full international and a regular with an EPL team. So I think, Shankland, I don't really fancy a shining Shankland at all. But I think the question we need to be asking is he worse than O, or is he better than O? I don't think that there'd be much to choose between Shankland and O. I think, with O potentially disappearing for the Asian Cup, we certainly need another option in there. Now, I'm not by any stretch of the imagination recommending to be saying Lawrence Shankland. I think there's probably a million better players at better value elsewhere in Europe. And I did like the idea of Sidney Van Hooijdonk. He looked a sort of Giakoumakis type player when we were linked with him, but that didn't transpire. So, I think there's value to be had out there, and there's definitely, there's definitely strikers to be had in our price bracket who would be better than O and closer in ability level to what Kyogo is.
Yeah, like the Van Hooijdonk story is not disappearing. The guy up in I think it was Brøndby or something like that, the young striker up there, the Danish guy. That there was talk that deal was agreed, ready to go for January. So let's just watch and see. But yeah, as you said, there's plenty more options there. But if we're going to go back the way we just did, and we're talking about Aaron Hickey and stuff like that, there's a couple others I'm going to mention. I think we could have done a lot worse than like Lyndon Dykes. I didn't rate him at the time, but if you've got O and you've got what Lyndon Dykes is doing for Scotland and you've seen him doing his club thing, I don't think that would be a downgrade, which back then I probably thought it would have been. And so that's a little bit of a hot take there. But the other one, I always thought we needed that midfield enforcer, someone who could sit in the 6 and just batter people. And we've rotated through people. Abelgard's been and gone. Quan's come in and done nothing. Awada's barely been sided. I thought someone who could come in. And I know his family ties are to the blue side of Glasgow, but I always thought if you could have got Lewis Ferguson, I rated him the whole time. I thought he would have been a great young Scottish player to bring through. But, he's got the wrong last name, and I think some areas of the stadium wouldn't have liked that signing, but I would have been all for it.
Yeah, I mean, I would have been okay with signing Lewis Ferguson. I mean, I know his dad's an ex-Rangers player and all that, but you've got guys throughout the history. Some of our best players have been former Rangers fans, like Kenny Dalglish, and guys like that. Scott Brown, I think, the Rangers fan back in the day, and
Greg Taylor at the moment grew up one and was in their academy.
Yeah, I think James Forrest as well was a Rangers fan when he was younger, but it really doesn't matter to me. And I think that's a good example you've raised of a player who just sort of turned their nose up because he was playing for Aberdeen. And somebody who probably, if we tried to sign him now, we probably couldn't afford them. These guys all go to Serie A now. It seems to be a very fashionable thing to do, to move from Scotland to Serie A. And the Italian teams obviously aren't turning their nose up at these types of players and that league's clearly a higher standard than what we're playing in just now. So I think it's something we should never turn our back on, and we should always be in the market for the best Scottish talent.
100%. Like, I think he went for about £3.5 million, if my memory's right.
Yeah.
So could have easily afforded that.
Josh
And
Doig from Hibs was another one. He's doing
yeah,
really well over there. And another guy you could have got for a couple of million, but we prefer to throw 3 or 4 million at guys like Bernabe. You could certainly have got much better value from a Scottish player.
even looking within Scotland as well, like we mentioned early on about like what's his name? Johnson being 25. And in the off season we we're linked with Ryan Strain, an Australian international who can play right back, he can also play left back and as a right winger. Like, he's been on fire so far this season, playing unbelievable at St Mirren. And I'm looking at that going, like, it wouldn't have been too much of a drop off. Like, if you got him and Ralston as your backups there, you, I don't think you would have lost much when if Johnston was out or anything. You'd still have two capable players. So things like that, there are quality. I'm not saying to sign him. I'm just saying, like, within Scotland, there are players who do a job for us. But we'll leave that topic there, and we'll get into the Steven special now. We've got 4 questions for you. This is the fun part. So this now is not about the club. This is about you as a Celtic fan. So, in your whole lifetime as a Celtic fan, who would be your all-time favourite Celtic player and why? And I've got in brackets other than Larson, because that one tends to come up quite regularly. So who would it be?
Yeah, look, I think most people from my era would probably say Paul McStay, who was just such a fantastic player, and certainly the sort of late 80s version of Paul McStay, the centenary season of 87-88 was I think was his peak of his Celtic career, and he was just a marvellous player. But I've heard, a few of the other guys doing the Tim Talks have said Paul McStay, so I'm going to be a little bit different. I'm going to say the best player I've seen in a Celtic jersey has been Lubomir Moravcik. Just in terms of sheer raw ability, for a guy who came into the club in his 30s, with his career probably on the slide a little bit. Certainly, the Scottish press laughed at the signing, ridiculed him, but he turned out to be such a great player, and a guy who was well known outside of Scotland, was regarded as a really good technical player and a brilliant player. A guy who'd had a long and good career in the Bundesliga, and just some of the technical ability he showed, the free kicks he scored, the shooting from range, his range of passing, was just all incredible. And I think the couple of years, or the few years that we enjoyed him at Celtic, was just a great time to be around the club, because a fantastic player. So in terms of technical ability, I think it's got to be Lubo for me.
Was it Dr. Joe who signed him, or was it?
Yeah, it was Joe Venglos, because he was a Slovakian, like Joe Venglos, and so he knew all about him. He knew, and I remember, there's a very famous newspaper quote from the now ridiculous Hugh Keevans, when he was lambasting the club for signing this nobody from Slovakia when they could have signed John Spencer. I don't know, you probably won't even remember John Spencer, but John Spencer was just quite a wee fat guy that used to play for Rangers, who went on to achieve the square root of nothing in the game, and not anywhere near the player Lubo Moravcik was. And that sort of highlighted the sort of ignorance in the Scottish media pack, that they looked down their nose at a player just because they hadn't heard of him. But Joe Venglos had heard of him, and he knew all about him, and he knew exactly what he was getting. And I remember the first game he played against Rangers, I think it was 1997, I think, maybe around about that time anyway. And Rangers were in the ascendancy at that period of time, and we beat them 5-1 at Celtic Park, and Lubo Moravcik just absolutely ran the show. It was either his first or his second game for Celtic, and he just ran the show. He scored twice, and was just a head and shoulders above anyone else in the park. So just an absolutely fantastic player, and how great he would have been if we'd got him maybe 7 or 8 years previously.
He was all up here as well, from
Mm.
my seeing. He was like, yeah, he wasn't the fastest, but his brain was probably 2 or 3 steps ahead of everyone on the pitch. and he's just unbelievable player. So yeah, good call there.
Yeah.
Who would be your top 5 players that you've seen play for Celtic in your lifetime? This is basically like the equivalent. I'll call this like our Mount Rushmore sort of thing, but I'm giving you an extra player because you've just given your favourite, so that's an automatic. So who would be your others to make out your top 5? Or if you want to make it a five-a-side team, who'd be your top 5?
Okay, so obviously I've included in there Paul McStay, who was, as we mentioned before, was just a wonderful player and a fantastic midfield player. And I was fortunate enough to see the best of Paul McStay through the late 80s when I was going to the games home and away. And as I mentioned before, the centenary season he was just sublime. One of the best one of the best passes I've ever seen in a game of football was in the 1988 New Year fixture against Rangers, where he done a little pirouette in the middle of the park and he split the defence with one pass to send Chris Morris down the right, and he squared the ball for McAvenny to score and a 2-0 win. And that was just typical of the sort of football Paul McStay was producing at that time. He sort of struggled a bit later on by the fact that the whole club was on the slide in the early 90s, and he did get a couple of bad ankle injuries, but still an absolute club legend and a fantastic player. The next one I've gone for is
as I say, and
sorry.
he lives in your neck of the woods as well.
Yeah, that's right. He's down in the Shire. Yeah, I've got a couple of mutual friends, so I'm still hopeful that I'll bump into Paul McStay one of these days. And I've got up here on the wall behind me one of these jerseys here is an original centenary year jersey that I've kept with me all these years. So I'm going to try and get him to sign it if I ever get a chance.
I was going to say, if I ever met him, I just want to give him a cuddle and say thanks for everything because he was my favourite growing up. But you want to get a
Yeah.
jersey signed, then you got to get it framed. So I think you win.
Yeah. So the next guy on the list, the next guy I've got on the list is a guy who played a lot of football next to Paul McStay, and that was John Collins, another absolutely sublime footballer that we got from Hibs in the sort of early 90s. And just a wonderful player. I had a chance to sign for Rangers, but it was my brother actually went to college down in Galashiels, which is where John Collins is from. So he knew the whole family were all massive Celtic fans, even though he was playing with Hibs. It was a dream to play for Celtic. So Celtic came calling. Rangers tried to get him across there with a bribe of loads of cash, but he turned them down to play for Celtic. And although he never really got the trophy haul that his talent deserved because of the period of time he played at Celtic, but a great player and a great left foot. Scored a couple of cracking goals against Rangers at Ibrox, 2 free kicks. One of them was in a game where we'd been locked out of Ibrox, like we are at the moment. And when David Murray had locked us out because there was some damage to seats or something like that. But the real reason was he just wanted to sell all the seats to Rangers fans. So he used that as an excuse. So there was no Celtic fans in the ground. Celtic fans from the time will remember, though, that was a game when a plane flew overhead with a banner trailing behind it saying "Hail, hail, the Celts are here." And John Collins scored an absolutely fantastic free kick. The game finished 1 each, but he scored another one in a 2-0 win, I think, the following season when Paul McStay scored as well. So great player, fantastic player, and he was definitely in the top 5 for me. So the third one on the list was Brian McClair. Brian McClair was nice. Chalky McClair, yeah. So Brian McClair was a hero of mine when I was young, growing up during the 80s, and just a really good, intelligent football player. Didn't really grab the limelight much. Played beside guys like he who we never speak of, the man only known as Judas, who took a lot of the limelight away from him. But looking through the lens of history, he was probably a better player than him, and certainly he got enough goals and he had enough assists and enough all round into his game to be considered to be a really, really good player for us. And he got his move to Man United and went down there. And I think he was their first player to score more than 25 goals in a season for something like 30 years or something mad like that. So it's a big hero down in Manchester as well. And I've been listening to his podcast recently. He's got a podcast called Life with Brian. And he's a very interesting guy, really intelligent guy. Studied a university degree while he was playing football. So not your average footballer. and he's got a lot of interesting things to say even to this day, and still retains a real love of Celtic, still has a season ticket for Celtic, and goes there with his son. So loved watching Brian McClare, love listening to him now. So excellent player.
Yeah, his podcast is on the same podcast network that we're on, the Sport Social Podcast Network, so you can find him on there. Life with Brian or whatever it was. Yeah, bloody good podcast. Have you seen the video though of him? Like, it was like 2.5 minutes straight of him just picking up the ball out of the back of the net and running back as his celebration. So he scores a goal, runs and picks up and just tucks under an arm and just runs back. There's like a video on YouTube somewhere, and it's just 2.5 minutes of that. It's just hilarious. I had a good chuckle.
He scored a goal in a League Cup semi-final. Sorry, a League Cup final against Rangers. We actually ended up losing the game 3-2. But we were 2-0 down, and we'd fought our way back into the game, and it was a free kick. I don't know if you've seen it. Tommy Burns took the free kick. It was just outside the box, and rather than shooting, he just lobbed it. He just lifted it with his foot over the wall. And Brian McClare was behind the wall, or just beside the wall, keeping himself onside. Burns lobbed it over, and he just caught it on the volley and smacked it into the net from there. And yeah, he did as usual, just tucked the ball under his arm and ran back to the centre circle. So yeah, a really good goal. But that was typical of him, the sort of understated way he celebrated goals.
Yeah, I love that. Who's your fourth?
So fourth on the list, I've got this one might surprise a few people, but it was Charlie Nicholas. Now, when I'm talking about Charlie Nicholas, I'm talking about the 1981 version of Charlie Nicholas. And Charlie Nicholas, for me, was my first footballing hero. Because, at that time, I was, 12 in 1981, and he scored like 50 goals in the season. He was just, at that time, he was just a magnificent goal scorer. Still young. I think he was only 20, 21 at the time. And he was just on fire for Celtic. Very sort of glamorous lifestyle, the first sort of pin-up footballer that we had seen in our generation. He was always getting pictured in the paper with models and getting his picture taken, the tops off and the big hairy chest and all that, the 2 earrings and the ridiculous hats and all this, leather coats and that. So it was just something we'd never seen before, and a great player. And some of the goals he scored in that season were incredible. Ruined his career, of course, by making a bad move down to Arsenal when he should probably have gone to Liverpool, who were interested in him at the time, and slotted into a successful system there, but got sort of dragged in by the bright lights and the nightlife of London. Laterally, he's turned into a bit of a knob, I will admit. His takes on the media are just brutal, and I've got no time for him at all. But at that time in 1981, he was just a sensational footballer.
I'll have to take your word for it, Stephen.
Yeah, go and look up some of the goals he scored. Especially against Rangers, he got some crackers against them. Scored one in a league, I think it was a League Cup final in 1981 or 82. It was absolutely pissing down with rain, and Murdo McLeod and Charlie Nicholas scored, and we won 2-1. And Nicholas's goal in that game was just an absolute cracker. So you get a chance, go and look at some of his goal highlights. Because a really, really great player.
Will do. We'll have to check that out because, I didn't see him play like that season because that was the year I was born.
Yeah, I'll let you off with that then. So the fifth player in my team, and I can't let any top 5 team of Celtic players go without mentioning Tommy Burns. The Tommy Burns for me was just everything about Celtic growing up. He was Mr. Celtic, born within a stone's throw of Celtic Park, stuck with the club through thick and thin, went on to be a very good manager of the club, who brought some really exciting brand of football to Celtic. And, although, in terms of technical ability, goals scored, maybe he wouldn't rank up there with the best of them, but just what he displayed in terms of passion for the club, how he wore his heart on his sleeve as a Celtic player and a fan. He was quite open about the fact he was just a fan who got lucky and was able to play for the team that he loved. And, even to this day, talking about Tommy and how we lost him far too young, it does bring a tear to my eye. It was such a big part of the club growing up. As I remember him, I remember sitting with my granddad watching the 1977 Scottish Cup final. And Tommy Burns was a substitute, or he was just a youth player at the time, part of the first team setup, and he had that really classic white tracksuit on. with Celtic FC emblazoned on the back of it. You know, a lot of these retro sites are selling it now. And he had this big flame of bright red hair, just a young kid, maybe 17 or something like that. And just to see him, you know, transition right through the team, right through the years as a top class player, and then as a manager, and never did anything to let the club down, and always maintained his love of the club. Fortunate enough to meet him on a few occasions, and an absolutely wonderful guy as well. And a really sad loss for Celtic when we lost him.
Yep, 100%. It's only one Tommy Burns. What a club legend.
Yeah.
All right. So next question for you. What are some of the most memorable games that you have seen Celtic play, and what is so memorable to you about those games?
Okay, so the first memorable game, it's one I've mentioned already, was the European Cup quarter-final against Real Madrid in 1980. Incredible to think, you know, that was the last time that we reached that stage of the European Cup, as it was called then. You know, and we actually beat Real Madrid 2-0 at home, goals from George McCluskey and Johnny Doyle. And I just remember the atmosphere was incredible. I was only a young kid, and my dad got us tickets and took us along. And then we just sort of stood down the front near the Celtic end, where the Celtic end was. And, you know, can't remember much about the game. Probably couldn't see much about it, you know, because you're right at the front. The view's wasn't great from that end of the ground, but just the atmosphere, the lights, and you know, the way anybody who's been to a European night at Celtic Park will tell you the way the green and white hoops looks against the lights, just looks absolutely special. Real Madrid that night wore an all blue strip. Rumours were that it was just trying to get a bit of a rise out of Celtic, but I don't know if that was an official away kit or not. They had a very famous England international playing for them at the time called Laurie Cunningham, one of the sort of first English players to move overseas and play. But a great game, and one that I remember really well. I remember it really fondly because I was there with my dad, who's sadly no longer with us. So that would be the first sort of big Celtic game I remember. The next one I want to talk about was the 1985 Scottish Cup final when we played Dundee United. So that would be my first cup final that I went to on my own on the supporters bus. And it was a memorable game in that it was the 100th Scottish Cup final that had been played. And it was one of the first sort of late shows that Celtic became really famous for in latter years. We were a goal down to a player called Stuart Beattie, I think the guy's name was. And late on in the game, we scored 2 goals, I think, in the last 5 minutes of the game. One was an excellent free kick from David Provan, and the next was a cross in from the right from Roy Aitken, who was absolutely magnificent that day, and a header from Frank McGarvey. And we took the cup home. Absolutely brilliant, really memorable. The next game was a very famous game in Celtic's history, the 1986 game against St Mirren at Love Street, where we went into the game with very little chance of beating Hearts to the title. They had to lose. All they needed was a draw away to Dundee, and we had to beat St Mirren by 3 goals or more at home. Of course, we were 4-0 up at half time, but you know, it was a bit of a party time. But nobody really thought, you know, Hearts were going to lose. But they up stepped our hero, the man we love, Albert Kidd, to score 2 goals for Dundee, and we got another goal in the second half, and the rest was history. But what a day that was! There's nothing better than to win a game like that or to win a league like that when you don't think you're going to. It's very unexpected, and the celebrations after that game were just incredible. So next up, again, a game against Dundee United in 1988, and another Scottish Cup final in our centenary season. And another late show. This time we were a goal down to Kevin Gallagher goal. And we come back to win the game again, literally the last 5 minutes with 2 goals from Frank McAvenny. Absolutely brilliant. Really hot day, really sunny. By that time I was 19, so I'm starting to dabble with the old demon drink. So I remember having a bit of a tipple at a bottle of Buckfast before that game. With a good mate of mine, me guy called Tam Guthrie. We sat outside Hampden that day and got a little bit sparkled, but a really hot day and a brilliant day, and just to round off a magical season. Great scenes at the end of that game. So a bit of a gap then after that to my next game, because obviously the 1990s was a bit of a decade to forget. But I'll fast forward to the year 2000 when we beat Rangers 6-2 in Martin O'Neill's first game against them. And again, what stands out about this game was we didn't really expect to win, to be honest. You know, Martin O'Neill had just come into the club, signed a lot of players. We'd lost the league by 25 points the year before to Dick Advocaat's Rangers. And, you know, everyone to a man would have accepted a draw. But we just came out and we blew them away. We were 3-0 up in 20 minutes. And after that, it was just party time. And rounded off by, you know, Henrik Larsson's chip over Kloss, which is a goal everyone will have as either their favourite Celtic goal or certainly up there. And that was just an incredible game, and a game where we announced that we were back, really, and that we were going to dominate Rangers. And what Chris Sutton said was absolutely true. We're here to put them in their place. And I don't think that many people could argue that from that year, 2000 to this year, we haven't put them in their place. We well and truly have. And I think that was a game that really started it all.
That Larsson goal, Kloss wasn't a dummy as a keeper either. That's my all-time number 2 goal.
Mm-hmm.
The only one above it was the invincible Treble Rogic goal for me. That's it.
Yeah.
And that's because I'm Australian and I was at the CSC over here, and a few other things, but that one, number 2.
Yeah. And probably the last game I'll mention is the UEFA Cup final against Porto in 2003. So I was fortunate enough to get a ticket for the game, and I went over there, and it was an incredible trip. Loads of memories from the trip. We actually flew out to Seville the day before the game. We had booked a package through a travel company called Harry Hines Travel. Anybody who followed Celtic through that period will know who Harry Hines Travel were. They used to organise a lot of Celtic away trips, and we bought this travel package that was a night in a hotel on the outskirts of Seville, right? And then you know, you go into Seville the next day for the game. But the flight, you know, there was so many people flying out of Glasgow that day. The flights all got delayed, so we ended up not getting into Spain till about 7-8 o'clock at night. And it turned out the outskirts of Seville actually meant 60 miles from Seville. Actually on the outskirts of a completely different city called Huelva, which is near the Portuguese border. So by the time we got to that hotel, there was really nothing much to do. It was in a really small town with nothing at all there, apart from having a few pints in a hotel bar. So we got up the next morning, jumped in a taxi. There was a bus there to take us to the game, but it was only leaving at 2 PM or something like that. So myself and my brother jumped into a taxi and just went straight into Seville about 10 o'clock in the morning. And I always remember driving into Seville. It was through like a sort of main, sort of not a motorway, but quite a main road. And either side of the road and in the central reservation was just all Celtic fans waking up, basically after sleeping out there the whole night. And that was it. It was like the opening scenes for The Lion King when all the animals are waking up. All you see was all these Celtic fans getting up and stretching to get ready for the day. So we got in there. That was us, round about the square in Seville where there were all the rest of the fans that were there. Great day. You know, the game was very disappointing. Still breaks my heart to think about it. I'm not one of those guys who say, "Oh, it was just great to be there." It was a heartbreaking loss, and a difficult one. I've never watched the game, and I've heard a lot of people saying this. I've never watched it back again. I've seen the goals, but I've never watched the full 90 minutes back again, and I probably never will. And it was just that disappointing, and I think it would have just been what the team at that time deserved, would be to lift a European trophy. So after the game, there was a bus ready to take us all back to this wee hotel again, 60 miles from Seville, but we just went, there's stuff that. So we just went back into the centre and got on the drink again. Ended up drinking till about 4 or 5 in the morning and catching the first train back to Huelva, which was the city near where we were staying. Got back to the hotel, and unbeknown to us, there was a Glasgow underworld figure was also staying in a hotel, and there'd been all sorts had happened the night before. So the hotel was surrounded by police cars. Somebody had threw a bed out of a window. It was like a scene from The Hangover. You know, so there was a bed floating around in the pool, and there was all sorts of dramas had happened. So we basically just had a quick change and went back out again. We weren't flying home to Scotland till about 10 o'clock at night. So we got a taxi into the closest city, which was Huelva. Turned out to be a really nice little medieval city. And found a nice pub out with an outdoor area and just sat there and sort of had a few more beers to round off the trip. But, just an incredible trip and one that will live long in the memory. The most disappointing aspect of it was that for my era, that was probably our Lisbon. That was our chance to write ourselves into immortality and tell people in 30 years' time that, yeah, I was there, I was in Lisbon. But because we lost, it sort of disappeared into the history books. But that's probably about the most memorable games I can think of. To be honest with you, I could talk all night about memorable games, but I'm sure you don't want to listen to me for too much longer.
Yeah, go to part 1, part 2, part 3. We could have a whole series of them, Stephen.
Yeah.
All right. Last question for you. Other than Messi and Ronaldo, always start with that. Who would be the one player that you have seen play during your lifetime and wish that they could have signed for Celtic? If money is no issue, so don't worry about transfer fees, wages, anything. If there was one player that you've seen in the past and I'd give anything to see that guy play for Celtic, who would it be?
Well, when I was thinking about this one, the same name kept popping into my mind, and I wasn't going to use him because actually he did play for Celtic, but the player I would have loved to have seen playing for Celtic was Roy Keane. Now, not the version of Roy Keane that we actually did see in a Celtic jersey, but the guy who at his pomp was unquestionably the best midfielder in Europe when he was playing for Man United, when he was taking them to winning the European Cup. So just an absolutely fantastic player. We only saw a sort of half-broken version of Roy Keane at the tail end of his career when he had hip problems and we didn't see the best of him. But if we could have signed him at his peak, it would have been an incredible signing for Celtic. I mean, even as an injured player, we still saw flashes of it, but not really enough. But that's if I could pick one player, it'd have been peak Roy Keane. I'd love to have seen him play for Celtic.
Fair call. Can't complain with that. It was on another level. I just remember those him and Vieira battles that they used to have, and just seeing that, and you're like, imagine getting him in that midfield in an old firm, and yes, I can say that because that's what it would have been at the time.
Yeah.
And him into one of them going, boot to shin on guys like Barry Ferguson and those sort of blokes. So, yes, please.
He did actually. He actually played an Old Firm game, which we won 1-0 at Ibrox with a goal from Magic Zarabski. And he absolutely dominated Barry Ferguson. He actually played against Barry Ferguson, and the bold Barry never got a sniff. And Roy Keane barely got a second gear. I think he cleaned out Ferguson with a tackle early doors and just laid down a marker, just said, look, this is my pitch. You're an invited guest. Behave yourself. And that just gave us a little glimpse into what Roy Keane was capable of, and that was a half broken Roy Keane. It's just always remember that performance.
Perfect. Well, Stephen, thanks for sharing your memories and everything on this Tim Talk episode. Really appreciate it. It's been great to get to know a bit more about you and your journey as a Celtic fan. Everyone who's watching the episode, if you haven't done so already, please like the video, comment on the video, and then that'll help us in the YouTube algorithm. If you're on the podcast, make sure you download it, subscribe to the podcast app. Our social media channels are on the screen, Celtic Down on Twitter, Instagram, and then you got Facebook and YouTube under Celtic Down Under. You can find us there. Look for the boxing kangaroo logo. Just thanks again, Stephen. Really appreciate it. And ho ho.
Hey, well.